Awesome. So hi, I'm Meri Williams. I'm the CTO of this wonderful place. I am going to talk today about how we think about scaling our teams and scaling our culture as we do so. Thank you all for being here. It's good to have you. So I've worked at lots of different sizes of organization. I actually spent the first 10 years of my career in a company that was like $80 billion revenue, 150,000 employees. So it's quite weird to then, like a very different experience to be in much smaller startups since then. But the overwhelming thing I've learned over the last 5-10 years of scaling companies is there are some very definite inflection points, and that you hit these new numbers that are somehow like, they're not magical in any way, but new problems exist at these different points, and the things that you thought you'd never worry about suddenly become the things you really, really need to worry about. And so the first reflection I have on scaling is this thing about like knowing which inflection point you're approaching is really important to focus on the right problems. And what I mean by that is like when you have 10 people in the room, everybody knows everything for free, right? You don't have to spend a lot of time aligning everybody in the company on the mission because you all sit next to each other and you all know what you're trying to do, right? Over 10 people, some communication things start to happen. Over 50 people start going like, what's my career path here? It's a whole different set of kind of concerns become very apparent. At 100, people don't know everybody in the company anymore. And there's this thing called Dunbar number, which I'm not sure if you've all heard of, which is that the average human can only maintain connections with 150 other people, which is why like the traditional village size, as we, in kind of slightly longer ago history, tended to be around that. And we actually struggle as people to maintain meaningful relationships with more than that number of people. And you probably don't want all the meaningful relationships you're maintaining to only be with people at work, right? Like however, my colleagues are amazing, but I probably don't want to only have those with folks here. And so that's why you see both different things mattering at different points, but also most very successful organizations, when you look at how they're actually structured, they've got mostly highly functional groups of 100 to 150 people doing most things. They're not 140,000 people. They're a huge collection of 100 to 150 person groups. And one of the things that's really fascinating about being here is, I think so I joined last August, and in June, when we announced, end of June, when we announced that I was going to be joining, there were 50 engineers in the technology team, and by the 4th of September, there were 100. And that was that's an unusually rapid kind of transition from one inflection point to another. We're now 1,000 people in the company, which has happened, again, very rapidly. And so where other organizations might have had months or even years at these different points to get used to what's changing, we've sort of rocketed through some of those transition points very fast. You may have all seen this. It's a very funny diagram from a New York Times article about 6 years ago now, about how the different major tech companies, what their org structures are really like. I particularly love the Microsoft one. Have a number of friends who've described how those loaded guns feel as well. And I suppose one thing we've spent a lot of time thinking about at Monzo is what would we want our parody diagram to look like? It's probably not particularly like any of those, right? We're quite aware of some of the challenges some of those organizations have. But you can get very focused on the wrong things if you look too far at the horizon. There's lots of startups and scale-ups that talk far too much about what Google do and not what Google did when they were the same size or the same stage of the journey that they're at right now. And so we're trying to keep focused on the actual next challenge rather than the 10 or 15 years in the future or the 100,000 employees size challenge. Because it can be really strangely comforting to focus on the far too far future. It feels less urgent, it feels less terrifying. And so we actually do quite a lot here to try and go, is this really the next immediate thing that we should focus on? And so that thing of focusing on the right problems at the right time and remembering this inflection points thing is one of the guiding principles for how we think about scaling. The second, I suppose, scaling lesson I had, and I've scaled a number of different teams. I was at the Government Digital Service when we went from 30 to 300 people in 9 months, which was a thing. It was tough. Somebody had promised the Prime Minister a date, which wasn't immensely agile, but it was what happened. Um, and I've been in that kind of double, triple, or quadruple the team in a relatively short period of time situation a number of times. And though I'm a Python programmer by background, and so don't repeat yourself is one of our sort of very closely held aphorisms in that community. And it's a great programming principle, like reuse, modularize, make sure that you can save time, I suppose. It doesn't work for humans at all. It's great in code, terrible for humans. And this thing of needing to remember that we need to repeat important things constantly and consistently. There's a stat about people needing to hear something at least 7 times before it really sinks in, is increasingly important. And sometimes that's about helping people realize that they kind of don't know what they don't know. Sometimes it's about making sure that the same information is available to everybody in the company. One thing I really have enjoyed about joining here is all the talk about transparency is actually very real and very lived. And it's a very different kind of senior management team or executive team when everybody genuinely believes that everyone in the company can make a brilliant decision, and that if a bad decision is made, the root cause is much more likely that we failed to share the right context or give people the ability to make the right choice, rather than that somebody's going to kind of do something dumb. It's very refreshing, to be honest. And part of the reason I feel really strongly about this communication point is I've been in organizations where like there wasn't enough information, and very genuinely like the main thing that underinformed engineers produce more of than code is conspiracy theories. People think if they don't communicate, then like people just won't know. If you don't communicate, people will make amazing shit up. Like some of it's really fascinating to find out what people think is happening if they're not told enough. But again, it's one reason why I was very pleased that at the point I joined Monzo, it was already a very well-established thing that we shared a lot internally, and that people really had the right to know, and that we were transparent about lots of things. And so being clear, being consistent, and kind of getting to the point of saying things so many times you're really worried that you're boring everyone now, but for some people that'll still be the first time that it sinks in. It's quite important. I think it's very like visibly tough for people who were at Monzo when it was a really tiny organization or when it was relatively small, to remember that like the making sure everybody knows what's going on takes effort now when it's 1,000 people, where it maybe didn't when it was 10 or 15 or how many were when you were first here, Simon? 11, yeah. I imagine there weren't a lot of like weekly briefings needed when there were 11 people at the company, right? And the other thing I think we're getting increasingly good at, especially in engineering and product and design and in data, is remembering that we're not just communicating in the present. Our future selves and our future colleagues need to know why we did what we did, not just what we did. And so in engineering, we talk about architectural decision records. In the company generally, we have a approach of writing proposals for most things, and that being shared within the company very openly, and people being able to comment and contribute. But it means when you go back and you're like, this is weird. Is this weird because I don't understand how it works? Is this weird because at the time it totally made sense, but a whole bunch of stuff has changed? Or is it just weird and it can be fixed? And being able to go back and go, is this the way it is for a good reason or not, is super valuable. One of the questions I was asked when I was being interviewed to join by Oliver, who's our chief architect, was I'd been in a lot of what I would refer to as like legacy rescue situations. I've worked on code so legacy it's vintage, right? Like seriously. I've worked in places where like you go in and keeping the mainframe running is still the thing that you have to care about in a year that starts with 2.0, which is fun. But the biggest problem in those situations, so Oliver was like, how do we prevent anything that we're creating now becoming legacy? And almost all of that is about capturing context. It's not just writing documentation of what this thing does, it's writing documentation of why this thing does it this way. Because then when you want to change it in future, you can revisit it and be like, things have changed. It's safe to change this. When I was asked to talk about this topic, the main meat of what I've got shared today is probably our approach to, well, it's my philosophy, but reflected as our approach to how we think about scaling. Really, scaling the company and the teams is about creating the conditions for success. It's not telling people what to do. It's not forcing people to do things. It's literally like creating an environment in which people. I don't know whether. Oh, there we go. We just cut out. And I think we all know we hate bad bosses, right? Like the pointy head boss in Dilbert is an icon, negative icon for a reason. You know, we describe bad bosses as clueless, as empty suits, as pointless. We're all familiar with the seagull style of management: fly in, shout at everybody, shit on everything, fly away again. I do some talks, and the audience like recoils at that, and I'm like, oh, who hurt you? It's good. It's kind of good when people laugh. They're like through the pain of it, having experienced it. And I remember being an engineer and moving into a manager role for the first time, having not necessarily had brilliant being managed experiences, and deciding I just refused to be bad at something, and so I was going to learn enough to do well at this. This is the best cat gif on the internet, I can confirm after extensive research. You're welcome. And Katerina Fake's a leader in technology who I look up to a lot, and I like this characterization she gives of, you know, there's three kinds of managers: the bullshit umbrella protects their team, the bullshit funnel decides the person they least like in the team will endure the concentration of all of it. Again, if you've been that person, I'm very sorry for what you have endured. And then the bullshit fan kind of just spreads it all around indiscriminately, right? This guy called Nick Means, who's a engineering director over at GitHub, who's got a much better way of a much better term for this now, actually, which is, you know, if you try to be a bullshit umbrella, you risk people not knowing what's going on. And he says it's better to be a heat shield, which I really like, because a heat shield, you still know that there's heat over there. You're still aware of what's happening, but you feel, you know, you've got a bit of protection from it. You're able to keep going. I think it's a really good characterization. And so when I became a manager, and where a lot of my kind of thinking around this came from was, I have a favorite management book, and you can now decide that I'm far too nerdy for you to, you know, come up and speak to me afterwards, and that's okay. But it's this book called First Break All the Rules, which I like because it's very data-based. Gallup did a huge study, hundreds of thousands of people interviewed, trying to figure out what made teams high-performing. Not what made them happy, but what made them high-performing. And they looked at, why is this restaurant so much better than the others in the chain? Why is this factory so much more successful, got a much better safety record? Why is this division outperforming all the others? And they found that these sort of 12 questions predicted how high-performing a team would be, whether people could answer these positively or not. I know my immediate reaction to being given 12 things on a wall of text is like, thanks, now I'm drowning. I'm never going to be able to remember that. You don't have to remember that, don't worry. So if we zoom out, who's read Daniel Pink's Drive? A couple of you? Okay. There's a 12-minute long like sketch note video, which will save you the need to read the entire book if you would like to. But he did a review of basically the modern research in psychology about what motivates people, what makes people like not just get up, not grumble too much when they go to work on a Monday morning, but actually excited to get to work, to do what they're doing, and found that it was this combination of purpose and autonomy and mastery. So, do I believe in why? Is this mission meaningful to me? Do I get a say in what? Do I feel like I've got autonomy? And then, am I proud of how? Do I feel like I'm getting better at the thing that I do? Am I proud of the quality of the work that I do? And then take away any negative factors. You know, if you've got the worst commute in the world, or the purpose, autonomy, and mastery isn't going to make up for it indefinitely. And that kind of captures many of these 12 questions that predict high performance, right? So does the mission or the purpose of my company make me feel like my work is important? Do I know what's expected of me, and do my opinions seem to count? And I find it really fascinating how I remember reading this book and being like, oh, this is why people don't understand why creative technologists quit. Because a huge amount of this is about mastery, about feeling like you're good at the thing that you do and you're getting better at the thing that you do. And I look back at how many designers and engineers and data scientists and product people I've seen just get frustrated and leave, not from Monzo, to be really clear, in the past. And I look down that list of mastery, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can see where we were going wrong now. This book's from the late 90s, and some of the phrasing here betrays that. So I think we wouldn't just ask about materials and equipment anymore. We'd ask about people and time and access. Do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? Does someone at work care about my development? Are my co-workers committed to doing quality work? And in the last 6 months, have I talked to someone about my development? And do I have opportunities to learn and grow? But there's three that don't neatly fit into those three categories of purpose and autonomy and mastery, right? Have I received recognition or praise for good work in the last 7 days? Does my supervisor, it's a very 90s term, right? Does my supervisor or someone at work seem to care about me as a person? And do I have a best friend at work? I love this last question because it's a masterclass in cultural differences. A lot of the original research here was done in America, and apparently this is a perfectly appropriate question to ask in America. I have done talks like this in Northern Europe a lot, including in Scandinavia, and everybody bristles at this question. I'm South African, so I'm going to be a helpful translator for you between Northern European culture and American culture right now. Where an American would say, I have a best friend at work, you need to hear, is there someone at work who, even if work was not paying for the beers or food, I would willingly spend time with and not necessarily only speak about work? Okay? That's how you got to hear it. Like, so there's someone here I don't completely hate is the Northern European version of do I have a best friend at work? I've been here 18 years. I love you all, but you're weird. That's all I'm saying. But this is really about kind of being respected and rewarded. Camille Fournier, who was CTO of Rent the Runway, calls this community, I call it inclusion. It's people feeling like they can be themselves and be successful. And that kind of set of 12 questions then does fit very neatly into those four things. And so I think when we're trying to create those conditions of success, we're trying to create space in which people feel that they believe in why, in what we're doing. They have autonomy, they get say in what, are we doing the right thing? And are we doing the thing right, which is the mastery side of it? And then they feel like they can belong, that they're not, they don't feel like the odd one out, that they can do good work here and be who they are. And I think underpinning that is probably like my most, let's say hippie belief, but like, I think every person's capable of being great at what they do. I really don't think people get up in the morning and go like, I'm aiming for just south of mediocre, and if I can mess everybody else up around me, my day will be perfect, right? Nobody thinks like that, or very few people think like that. And so accepting that every role people can be brilliant at, and every role we should enable people to be brilliant at. One of the things I was delighted to find it was already happening when I joined here was the investment in the great tooling for the customer ops team, which I think you may have heard about earlier today. Like companies that prioritize it being a great working environment and working experience for everybody, that don't think of some roles as undesirable roles or some roles as lesser roles, I think are much more likely to have teams that scale with challenge, that keep going and keep getting better as time goes on. My fourth reflection on scaling, and one of the things that I think we're doing a lot more of right now as we've grown so quickly in the last few months, is that, yeah, sorry, some of my characterization is very technical, but this thing that we can try to test things that are people related, but observing the actual effect is a bit more useful sometimes. And so we can plan really hard, but sometimes the impact we have might not equal our intent. And spotting that and dealing with it is really important, especially as you're scaling quickly. So when you think that you've told the company what matters and what we should focus on, and then you see people off doing something that you're like, why are they still doing that? Didn't we just say this is the thing that's important? Spotting that the way that you've communicated that refocus or communicated that change hasn't landed right is really important. and goes back to that thing about like recording context, getting really good at not just saying what we are doing, but also why we're doing it. So then people can make good interpretations and understand it really well. And kind of regularly checking in on that is important. At Monzo, we use things like, we do I've worked at a lot of places where they do an engagement survey for staff like once a year. We do one once a fortnight. We're asking people all the time. We use Peakon, we use Lattice, we have a culture of people giving each other feedback. It's much better when somebody feels able to tell someone this week that tell their teammate that they were upset, or that what they did seemed to undermine them, or it's going to hurt their growth or whatever, than them waiting 6 months for a review cycle. And encouraging that kind of checking in of how things are going is a really important part of the culture, I think. We also do retrospectives in teams, in collectives, which is sort of all, big collections of teams, and at the company level as well. And getting better at doing those. This is a talk by Jesse Link, who leads Twitter in London, but adding these kind of different techniques and different ways of stopping and going, like, how are things really going, and how could we continually improve on how we do things, not just what we're doing, it is really interesting. We've started to add some agile coaches into the team to help with that, because again, as we've gotten bigger and bigger, people who were doing that kind of scrum mastering, agile coaching type work as their side interest are finding it's almost full-time job these days. So we're starting to add some of those different specialist roles to get better and better at it. And then my last sort of reflection on how we think about scaling is remembering that how someone adds to the culture matters a lot more than how someone fits with it. I think we hear this term culture fit a lot in technology, in the industry, and it often just means, do I like them? Are they like me? I really worry about teams where they have going down the pub for a drink as part of an interview process. I think it helps people hire people who are just like them rather than people who are going to add something new. And so we've changed some of our, or we've evolved further our kind of interview processes and all those kind of things to make sure we're thinking about this, to make sure we think of it as not that every individual has to be everything, but that the unit of delivery is really the team. We get things, there's very little that we get done as individuals in kind of the modern working world, and so how do we make sure that individuals can answer this question of, like, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, but that the team as a whole has all of the strengths that it needs. We used to see an approach in how people were developed, how they talked about their progression, that you'd kind of find what they were terrible at and just focus on that. And that really just ends up with us leveling everybody out to kind of consistent mediocrity, right? If you ignore the things you're great at and just focus on the things you're terrible at, it takes a lot of effort to go from bad to okay. It probably takes just as much effort to go from okay to great. And in some ways, it'd be better to focus on the okay to great side of things, right? And so rather than trying to get everybody to be the same, we try to focus on how do we make sure the team's got everything it needs and get the most out of the differences between people, the most out of those different strengths. And that shift in perspective, I think, has increasingly been happening on me around the world. And, you know, if you look at any of the teal organizational stuff or the management 3.0 stuff, people are talking about this. But that old-fashioned approach of still going, what are you not great at? Okay, we're just going to focus on what you're not great at in terms of your development plan, is still sadly very prevalent. It's been a feature here of when we're discussing very senior promotions, we actively ask in the executive team, are we making the most out of what this person's great at? Are we focusing too much on something which they might not be brilliant at, but we could supplement them with someone good in their team? They don't have to become great at everything. They just have to fix any weaknesses that are controlling, that are going to make them not able to succeed in their role. I think we need to kind of just keep remembering that. We're not interchangeable resource units. I tell people that if your manager calls you a resource, you get to call them overhead. They'll stop calling you a resource quite quickly if you do that. Some of them just won't get it, and then it'll be hilarious for everybody else for months. Totally have done that to people. But if we think of ourselves as kind of, we're colors or we're flavors, we're better in complement or in concert with each other. The Avengers, although I would watch the hell out of a 7 Hulks movie, like the Avengers are cool because they're good at different things, right? And by their powers combined. Yeah, you're mostly too young for a Captain Planet reference, aren't you? I'm sorry. Feeling very old right now. But we tried to think about this as kind of about people and about roles as a matter of casting. If somebody is high potential and really good and they're not doing well right now, have we put them in the wrong place? Have we put them into a role that they're not getting the most out of what they're good at? They're not getting to do what they are best at every day. And where could we put them where they would excel? And one of the things that's fantastic about a rapidly scaling company is there's opportunity everywhere, right? Every team could do more if they had more people. Every area could do more if they just had a bit more analyst time or a bit more engineer time or a bit more design time. And so being able to maximize how much someone is a multiplier by getting the most out of what they're good at is really valuable. And so we focus on assembling great teams with complementary abilities, on finding if there's something missing in a team, we think about it as a team need for a different strength or a different capability rather than thinking about it as an individual missing something. It's quite a different way of managing, and a lot of kind of HR systems and people systems aren't particularly well set up for this approach, but we're fairly sure it's the right way of going about it, and we're working on the kind of tooling side of that to try and make sure that we find it easier to do as time goes on. And then the final point, which I'm almost to the end of my time, so I'm not going to go into much detail on, but focusing on that kind of crafting of inclusive environments. Most people, whether they're doing it consciously or not, they're asking all the time, am I expected here? Does it feel like someone like me has ever been here before? Am I respected here? And do I get the feeling I'm going to be taken seriously, be treated well? And then can I be myself and be successful here? Or can someone like me succeed here? And helping, as you've seen in the writing we've done about inclusion and similar, like helping the set of people who can say yes to those questions be really as broad as possible is something that we're really very focused on, making sure that, because we're trying to make money work for everyone, so we need everyone represented, right? If we don't have if we're missing key perspectives, then we're never going to build the very best product that we can. And so it really does very genuinely matter to us. So in summary, as we think about this kind of how do we scale as we go, how do we make sure we don't lose the great things that we've had, but we don't. Tom said a brilliant thing at one of the very first all hands I was in. Somebody asked him, he was worried about us losing the culture, and he said, Monzo culture, we can't treat it like it's in a glass box in a museum exhibit. It's going to evolve as we evolve, and we have to actively embrace that. We're not going to try and hold the culture static like it was when there were 20 people or 50 people. We're going to evolve it, but we're going to keep true to what we think matters. And I think that's absolutely what we're trying to do. And so in summary, we're kind of trying to stay aware of these inflection points that exist and adapt, focus on the right things at the right time. Trying to remind ourselves all the time that don't repeat yourself is a great programming principle, but a terrible human communication one. That creating conditions of success is really important. And those of you who've been to some other events might have seen like the way we do engineering management here is quite different because of that, because we think investing in that kind of success condition stuff is super important for people to succeed and people to keep leveling up as the company grows and the expectations on them grow. To remember that like sometimes it's easier to observe than to test with human stuff, and then that culture add is a lot more important than culture fit. Thank you all very much. I think we're not doing live questions, but I'm on Twitter, my DMs are open. I'll hang around a little bit afterwards if anybody's got a question in person. And thank you all very much for being here. I don't know who I'm handing back over to. Here we go.